last thing, Rick will be interviewed by Doug Casey. And as always, they have been coming here for the last 4 years, and I'm truly honored to have both of them. Mostly because in my adult life, these two gentlemen their speeches and their written work have made a massive difference in my way of thinking.
Okay, well, turnabout is fair play, they say. And last year, Rick was on my side of the table for this interview, and I've got to say, I think it's much harder to ask questions and interview somebody than just answer them. So what am I going to ask Rick? First thing I want to do is, Rick, I got to get your response to what Dana was saying. I'm speaking out of turn because you're the one that's asking some questions. I thought it was mind-blowing, tremendous, and great. But what did you think?
Well, I guess I would concur with that. I'm delighted, frankly, that you asked me a question about something that I have no expertise in. Because I don't take my answer particularly seriously. The whole concept that learning shouldn't be regimented and shouldn't necessarily be about the convenience of the parent so much as inspiring the kid makes sense to me. The fact that it makes sense to me as a pawnbroker is probably of no consequence, but I thought the whole concept to be quite seductive myself. I know from my experience with you that despite the intention of the religious establishment and the state, that you were largely unschooled, all through no fault of anybody but your own.
But you know, you must have given a dozen, 2 dozen or more, totally different speeches, all entertaining on some financial or economic subject, and they're all excellent. But, so we know what you think on those subjects, but I want to find out a little bit more about who you are and how you think about other things. Now, getting back to some of the things that Butler and Dana were talking about, what do you think about the nature or nurture debate? Let's talk about you in particular. Are you who you are because you were born that way, or did you form yourself, or did somebody else form you?
I guess those aspects of me, if there are any that you like, I can ascribe to other people and give them credit. I'll take the blame for those aspects of myself that you don't like. I think that, and again, you're talking to me about things that I have no understanding of at all. My suspicion is, in my own case, I've changed an awful lot over the years. And I suspect in my case that environmental circumstance and influences, including prominently your own and Bonnie's, have had a tremendous amount to do with who I am. So I suspect if I had to, assign large degrees of influence, that it would be nurture with regards to me more than nature. There were some circumstances I was incredibly lucky. I was born in a wonderful set of circumstances. I was born a large, active, Caucasian male. I had every possible advantage in terms of time, and so all of that's been useful. I'm probably, although occasionally hostile, I'm probably less hostile. I probably have less negative emotion than people would have if they hadn't been born with my incredible set of circumstances. And so maybe in some sense nature has something to do with it, by mistake. I suspect that the environment that I've been raised in, the people that I've come up with, as I say, including yourself, probably, in many regards, have had more to do with who I am than anything else.
Well, you openly own up to and admit the fact that you're a stockbroker. We all know that now. But I found out yesterday that you were a young Republican. So what is your political journey? How did you first start thinking about political and philosophical issues? And what was it that drew you away from being a young Republican?
I've thought a lot about that, Doug, and I'm going to blame you for some of the direction I took, and also, again, Bonnie. I think what I was when I was younger was a pragmatist. And I think when I looked around the world, it was obvious to me that a large measure of what the culture was about was who did what to who. And I think I instinctively understood that, what was that quote? That you understand politics in the context of the root of the word poly, from the Latin and English, poly from the Latin, pardon, from many in English, from the English colloquial, partic, from the English colloquial for small blood-sucking insects. So I think I understood the process for what it was, and it seemed to me that the Republicans were stealing on my behalf and the Democrats were stealing on somebody else's behalf. And since society was organized on the principle of theft, it would be more convenient for me to hang out with people who were stealing for me than from me. I learned later that, first of all, being a thief didn't leave you feeling good about yourself, and that it was an inefficient method of organizing society, and that the Republicans only purported to steal from me, for me as opposed to from me. I was seduced by the words of Ronald Reagan, which made a lot of sense to me, and then, but only partly. You had to compare what he said with what you thought the other guy was going to do. And then, again, he's the mainstream guy, although this has become a friend of yours, David Stockman. I mean, the most wonderful account of the effect of the Reagan seduction was offered up by The Triumph of Politics by Stockman, which showed it from an insider's view to be precisely the fraud that you had described that it was going to be, and you were correct. And as I said to this crowd, my conversion to understanding what you are about and what this crowd is about really had to do with Jack Pugsley telling me I was a libertarian, and I thought that Lyndon LaRouche was a libertarian. I thought he was a schmuck. And Pugsley giving me that book, Economics in One Lesson, you and Pugsley that night were genuinely bemused by me, but not laughing at me, which I thought was very sweet. Well, I had some advantages. You guys were, how do I put this politely? You were consuming substances that made you less capable of the debate, and I didn't know you guys well enough when I was driving. So it took me reading the book over the weekend for you guys really to prevail.
Talking about consuming substances, what brought you here to Canada from California? How did that work? I'd like to know that part of your background too.
That's actually very interesting. I had an aunt who lived up here, and so I became familiar with Vancouver in childhood, really.
Wow, his aunt is actually very famous, and I don't know if you want to disclose.
Happy to, yeah, happy to. My aunt is Jane Rule, who is in certain circles in Canada very, very famous. She was a pioneer in the feminist movement in Canada. She was a pioneer in the gay and lesbian community in Canada. She's also, she's deceased now, an avowed socialist. And so I had the opportunity to polish my skills in political debate, even when I was a pragmatic Republican. And she was very smart, so. Well-known author, yeah, many books. But back to the question, maybe that's part of my orientation towards liberty too. Two things happened. I was attracted to Vancouver anyway, and the University of British Columbia had a degree program in natural resource finance, which improbably is something that interested me at a young age. And the second thing that happened was in 1969, when I was making up that decision, a young, healthy American male was going to travel. And I thought, let me see, Canada or Vietnam? Vietnam had it in terms of weather. And you'll laugh about this, I've told you this, and this is not a joke. I remember watching television, which I never did, in 1967 or 68, and a really great American political philosopher, Muhammad Ali, was on the TV, and they were asking him about the draft and his stance, and he said one of the best lines that came out in the United States in the 1960s. He says, "I ain't got no quarrels with no Viet Congs. None of them ever called me nigger. I got no dog in this fight." And I was thinking, me too. Me too. I really did. I remember that just plain as day. And I was thinking at the time, I'd vote for this guy for congressman in a nanosecond. I'm delighted with the way things worked out. Canada has treated me extraordinarily well, although I still live in the United States. And so I guess maybe it was a fortuitous accident, Doug, but it was really wonderful. And that event, I think, made me more susceptible than many people would have been to the ideas of liberty, because I had a very, very, very straight sense that what my government had in mind for me was in every way evil. I mean, it was inconvenient for me, or would have been inconvenient for me to go to a hot place and have people shoot at me. And it would have been unpleasant for me to shoot at them, although, as you know, at that point in time in my life, I was not averse to violence. The non-aggression pledge was not something that made any sense to a 16-year-old from my culture and my size. But I didn't want to shoot anybody for no reason.
And you actually anticipated the next thing I was going to ask you, because you are one of the gentlest, most mellow pussycats, not when you're negotiating, but just on a personal level. But I don't think you were always that way, because you used to be a Golden Gloves boxer, and you ran a bar here where you were the bouncer, and you were generally kind of a wild child. So what, I mean, could you have gone off into a wrong direction from that point of view, and what made you turn around and turn into the pussycat you are today?
Personally, I became a stockbroker. I guess I could have done worse and become a newsletter writer or something like that. In terms of negative direction, I appreciate the way you framed the question. You've been a friend for years. Two things. I occasionally have the temptation to solve problems the way that I solved problems in my youth. At age 61, the means are less accessible to me. The joke in Vancouver years ago is that if I hit somebody, they either fell down or they did some awful funny thing standing up. I'm afraid now they might hit me back, so one of it is just practicality. But the other is, I realize in retrospect, and I should have realized at the time, what I did wasn't right. When you're a kid, and boxing, by the way, does anybody in the room ever boxed? It's an awful lot of fun. I mean, it really is an awful lot of fun, particularly if you're a kid with too much energy. And people talk about sports that are of the moment, this sort of Zen event where you're so into what you're doing that everything else goes away. If you're at a reasonable level in boxing and you aren't completely into what you're doing, you're looking at the lights, okay? You're on your back looking straight up at the ceiling. It's really, really quick. So it really is of the moment. But it's also really stupid. I know people who were smarter than me as kids, and they learned to do stuff that they can still do today. Tennis, golf, stuff like that. Imagine if you and I had been, negotiating a full warrant deal, and I said, hey, let's go a couple rounds now. I mean, there have been times when I've been tempted, don't get me wrong. Oh, one other thing, I didn't used to admit this because I was embarrassed about it. My bar career, and really my martial career, ended as a consequence of the intervention of the Canadian state, which turned out to have been a good thing. They had a law in BC that if you asked somebody to leave your licensed premises and they refused, and you were allowed to use reasonable force to subdue them if they resisted you, because they were deemed to have trespassed or assaulted you by trespass if you asked them to leave. And so, sometimes I subdued people with maybe more vigor than the law had intended. But at any rate, Her Honor Judge Proudfoot found that the fact that I pursued the plaintiff for 2 or 3 blocks from my premises before I subdued him meant that I couldn't avail myself of the assault by trespass defense. In my own defense with regard to the non-aggression principles, you need to know that I existed in a subculture, a bar subculture, that had its own rules and norms. And if I had to do now what I did, then I would do it again. The person that I subdued had hit a cocktail waitress who worked for me. And in that culture, if a man hits a female employee who works for you, he does not get away. So, separate and apart from the laws made for and provided by the Dominion of Canada, which are basically in that regard reasonable. In that particular circumstance, if I had to make a decision, if I had to do what I did again, I would do it again. Sadly, at age 61, I probably couldn't catch him. And had I caught him, I probably couldn't have punished him. It would have been incumbent on me to try.
Well, okay, so we're in Canada, and you are extremely well-traveled. You don't act like a medieval peasant, afraid to go over the next valley. You don't act like a plant and stay rooted to some place. Not a good survival strategy for a person anyway. And you earlier remarked that you had kind of a Plan B crib, but you neglected to say where that might be if things get uncomfortable in the People's Republic of California. Are you willing to discuss that, or let's say discuss places that you like in the world that you'd like to spend more time?
I misspoke, Doug. Bonnie and I have searched in our own minds for what the Plan B crib would be. We both acknowledge the need for a Plan B crib, but we have not found that place. As we have looked around, as you know, we spent a lot of time in New Zealand and love New Zealand, but in terms of a haven of freedom, the place is more like an incompetent America. Incompetent is good. I think that you have noted that the fact that the Argentine government is so efficient allows you to be more free than you would otherwise be, not because of their design, but rather because of their application of tyranny. I think first of all you have to be free in yourself. I think that's very important, irrespective of where you live. I haven't accomplished that yet. At least I haven't learned to be free from myself. I still work like I'm a slave, although I'm the enemy there. I think to me, if there was going to be a place outside the United States, part of it would depend on, I think I'm answering this correctly, how many friends I had there. It would be great if the weather was good, although I live part-time in San Diego, and I think anywhere in the world that I moved, other than maybe Ensenada, Mexico, right across the border, in terms of the weather, it wouldn't be as good. What you've done in Cafayete appeals to me, but at this stage in my life, I am enjoying working. Bonnie and I enjoy the social community that we have here in Vancouver. We enjoy the social community that we have in Carlsbad, California, and at any rate, I'm still working. I'm not doing whatever it is that you do, as an example. And it's inconvenient for me to get there. So I understand the question. I really do. And I'm not withholding the answer. I just don't have one.
Well, as far as what I do, I'm a hardcore unemployable, so. But that kind of leads me to this other thing here. Everybody here, almost, I think everybody here is a libertarian. And we've talked in the past about rich libertarian, poor libertarian, and they're mostly poor libertarians. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts as to why libertarians understand money and economics. Well, why aren't there more rich libertarians? You have a feeling or an opinion?
Yeah, it's probably wrong, but I thought a lot about that too. And one of the things I remember, not last year, but the year before, the first time I spoke here, is, some obviously poor libertarian talking about the obligation that the rich monocle-wearing libertarians had to him. You know, to which my response is, you fucking nuts. I mean, you're out of your mind. I also do believe, and I try to touch on my talk today, that too many of us, rich and poor, libertarian and non, use the faults of society or the faults of our partners or the faults of other people, the shortcomings that we see, as excuses for not obtaining whatever it is that we want. I don't care if it's money, I don't care if it's education, I don't care if it's happiness, as the Dalai Lama would describe it. And I suspect that if these poor libertarians decided that they wanted to become rich, and there's no requirement that they decide they want to be rich, but if they decided that they want to be rich, I think the most important thing that they can do is forget about all the roadblocks that they allow other people to put in front of them. And they set about getting rich. I mean, getting rich is really pretty simple. You figure out something that you like to do, and as a consequence will do better than others, that has some value. You work your ass off. You deliver value for other people. Those other people pay you. And you get stinking rich because most of your competitors never figure out what they want to do, and they only care about money rather than delivering utility. I mean, if you think about the delivery of utility in society, in interpersonal society, and how poor we are at that, the challenge isn't getting over the bar, it's getting under it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, you've done extremely well, and you've put together a balance sheet with a whole bunch of zeros behind it. Now, what's going to happen to that money? Now, well, this is very funny. You and Bonnie actually learned this lesson long before I did, but I've learned it also. And that is that the older you get, the less you want. You realize that all this shit that you buy and have is an expense and a nuisance and an obligation, which you pointed out earlier today. But that being the case, so what are you going to do with that money? Bonnie's going to do what she wants with as much as she wants, but then you're still going to have a fat tail. What are you going to do? Are you going to leave it to, what's going to happen?
I plead the fifth. I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I really don't have an answer to that.
Who are you going to corrupt?
That's a wonderful question, and I honestly don't know. That's something that Bonnie and I have been struggling with for a couple of years. How do we, first of all, protect ourselves from dying unprotected and having all that scratch go to the same group that tried to prevent me from getting it all these years? I mean, wouldn't it be ironic if I died and the People's Republic of California got the money? That would be horrific. I can't leave it to you. God knows what you do with it. I wouldn't want to wreck you. My health habits are worse than Bonnie, but I subject myself to less stress, so it's a toss-up as to which of us is going to go first. I really, really don't know the answer to that.
But you've got to confront it because it exists, reality exists. I mean, who's going to get it, and what do you do?
Well, I wish I'd thought to ask you that question last year. Ask me that.
Yeah, well, you missed your opportunity.
I have all these wisecracks. I can't evade this goddamn question. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. The question you asked me is very good, and Bonnie and I wrestle with this, and we talk about it, and after we talk about it for an hour or 2 hours, and I think about all these. The procedural questions are even mind-numbing. You meet with these lawyers and these accountants, and you set up these structures and stuff like that. And you'll wonder about when you die, who's going to attack the structure. And even that takes your mind off the central question that you asked me. Like, separate and apart from the legal stuff, what are you going to do with the money? I have no earthly idea. It was really, really easy to make it. I mean, I worked really hard, don't get me wrong. Bonnie and I, early on, if you're a capitalist and you don't have any capital, you're not a capitalist. So we saved, we worked, we didn't worked really hard, all that kind of stuff. But then when he starts making it, it's pretty cool the way it piles up. And for many, many, many years, since I haven't worked for money, although I love it. But to what end, I don't know. I mean, it's been fun. And I absolutely understand the question, because there's a big enough stash there. I mean, I only wish in my life I had as much money as Doug thinks I have. But the question as to what I'm going to do with it is a very good one. I'm sure you've actually opened a can of worms that will keep Bonnie busy all weekend, telling me that we need to deal with it, for which I'll never forgive you. I need to tell you one story on this topic, by the way. You should never let a stockbroker have a microphone in front of a target-rich crowd like this. But Doug likes money, too. And some years ago, and he's really hopeful, he's an amazing speculator. Some years ago, I called him and said, Doug, I have an investment idea for you. This is the best investment idea I've ever had in my life. I can tell you, I can show you how to turn $30 into $1 million in 3 years, and it absolutely, positively will happen. And Doug has this touching faith in me, despite having known me for many years. And he looks at me and says, really? Now, Doug at this time had just quit playing polo, or kind of quit playing polo. And he had 30 polo ponies, which, by his testimony, would cost him about $1,000 a month each. And so I said, so do the math. We take 30 copper-jacketed bullets, $1 each. One goes in each horse, which saves you $30,000 a month times 3 years. $30 turns into $1 million. And Doug, I don't know if you've ever heard Doug laugh. So I tried to create the same problem for Doug that he's asking me about today.
Yeah, I mean, show you how smart I am. I still have the damn horses, and I haven't ridden those for several years. It's totally insane. So don't take any financial advice from me. Well, I don't have any more questions. Maybe some of you guys have a question or two for Rick. I think that, oh, there's a lady that seems to.
I think there's a whole lot of people in this audience that would be glad to help you spend your money.
No, one of the questions that you didn't ask me, Doug, or maybe you were trying to ask me, that sort of did amuse me, is the philanthropy question. And I tried to deal with that a bit this morning, and I agree with you philosophically. I honestly do agree with you philosophically, but I give money away anyway because, as this gentleman said, it's a consumer good. But I really also think, again, as I said this morning, that, and you have told me many times, that the problems that you want to get solved, you need to work at seeing that they can get solved for a profit. And the whole idea of, as an example, microcredit, I'm hoping to find microcredit organizations that'll be profit-making microcredit organizations. The bank that Bonnie and I run, I mean, we don't take the money out, but some years ago, a group of us put $925,000 in. There's $1.3 million left, so the burn is negative. In other words, they make money. They've loaned the money 7 or 8 times, so we've managed to make loans to 8,000 women, improve 8,000 lives. We have 2,000 loans outstanding. And amazingly, the idiot philanthropists who run this bank describe it as a failure. Talk about a lack of feedback mechanism. But that gets me to libertarian philanthropy, and it gets me to things like Students for Liberty and other libertarian organizations, and the need for those organizations to begin to embody more realistically the milieu that they existed and become profit-making. And I want to thank Jeffrey Tucker, the Chief Liberty Officer, for giving me an outlet in that regard. I can't give money to liberty.me. That would be really, really, really self-defeating. I mean, why would you corrupt a profit-making organization? But the idea that I can give money to libertarian organizations that will conduct their outreach efforts through a communication platform like liberty.me is extremely exciting to me. And while it won't diminish my estate to any substantial degree, it'll give me, in the first instance, a lot more satisfaction than I could get in any other way, shape, or form, and hopefully in some small way lessen the damage that I might otherwise do with that money. I've been thinking for the last 10 years, since you and I have had this discussion about philanthropy, how to get the stuff done that I want to get done that isn't being done by the market. And increasingly I'm seeing outcomes, and I wanted to use this as a sort of a forum for liberty.me. A question is a forum for liberty.me simply because the people from liberty.me are present. And this is an audience, unlike most audiences in the street, where they'll understand that this sort of solves the dilemma that you had posed for me a decade ago with regards to philanthropy.
Yeah, nothing can overcome the second law of thermodynamics. Everything degrades and falls apart. But a profit-making organization stays together much better than some charity, which becomes a cynosure for its directors. We can get into that. We're on the same page. Who's got another question for Rick? I think that's what you're standing there for.
We can have one more question.
One more question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I ask you guys this every year, and I just want to see if your answer changes. And partly, I think you did drill in my head a little more. But let's say you guys are 30 years younger, and you're going to do it all over again in this day and age, this market. How are you going to do it? What sector is going to go into? What verticals? What's the angle? What would you do? And I'm trying to impart that and kind of encompass that in my own.
Everybody hear the question? So you're not asking me to say what you should do. You're asking me what I would do if I was young right now?
Yeah.
I'm a really boring guy. If I was really, really young right now, starting off in business, I'd become absolutely fascinated with insurance, with risk. I think the only part of government that's popular is the insurance function, and I'm fascinated with it. So the idea that I could really, really, really succeed in insurance, undermining the need that 200 or 300,000 people might have for government, would be very fulfilling for me. At the same time that both sides of the insurance business, the understanding of risk in the insurance function and the application of capital in the investment function, interests me. The whole nature of risk and reaction to risk and exploitation of risk is fascinating for me. It's the type of intellectual exercise that I joke that I would do for free if it didn't pay so well. And because I have a passion for it, I have a skill for it. So while what I had a passion for in the 60s was natural resources, if I had to do it again today, I would do insurance, personally.
It's a good answer, and I don't disagree with Rick, but I'm psychologically oriented a little differently. I would definitely, the land of opportunity today is Africa. And I would go to the weirdest countries I could think of in Africa that nobody goes to, and those are still places today that if you're quick on your feet and can bring some value, you can be sitting down with the richest guys in any of these nothing-nowhere countries in a matter of a week or 10 days and talking turkey with the president if you want, and take it from there. So I think that's the land of opportunity. And today, that's what I would do.
That's it.
Thanks.